In 2 narrative previews released by Bungie, they detail a top-secret Warlock order who is investigating our Guardian's involvement with the death of Cayde 6. Now, on top of that, they even recognize the Drifter is corrupting Guardians and sending them into the wild as these rogue shadows. Today we're going to discuss these lore previews and dive into some pretty crazy conspiracy theories involving the Drifter's possible role in Cayde 6's death.
This is going to hurt a lot. Any last words?
How's your sister?
Alright Guardians, welcome back, hope you're doing well, and this is definitely going to be an interesting one for sure. I know I always say that, but this one in particular is pretty crazy. So as mentioned before, we're going to start by reading the first 2 narrative previews, summarize what that could possibly mean, and then we'll speculate and have some fun with it. Now of course I'm not saying anything at the tail end part of this video is true, but just some conversation that came up when talking with some friends. There are definitely some holes in some of these theories and evidence, but this stuff is always interesting to talk about, and I want to hear your opinions as well. So here's the timestamp for the conspiracy theory type part, and let's get into the lore right now. The first narrative preview is titled Praxic Order. So in this card, the Drifter is going to go undercover to listen to a top secret meeting. It says the more petals Lionel swept into his garbage bag, the more there seemed to be. His back slightly crooked with age, burned in protest as he continued to stoop and work. A man in a long coat stood watching him on the opposite side of the long hallway. Lionel figured he'd go away eventually, but the man stayed, idly flipping a green coin. "Can I help you?" Lionel asked, growing annoyed. "They make elders do this? Can't the maintenance frames handle it?" Speeds things up, the petals get everywhere from the whatever the kids call it. Crimson Days? That's the one. Come on, no one's too old to celebrate Crimson Days. "My wife died the day the tower fell." The man stared at the ceiling. Lionel continued to sweep. "I got nothing to do today," the man said. "Let me take care of this for you." No thanks." Lionel dumped another dustpan full of petals into his bag, then turned and walked right to the man's outstretched hand, palm up, full of glowing sapphire cubes. "Lot of glimmer," Lionel said, eyeing the money and the man in turn. "Yours. Let me finish this job for you." "You a guardian?" It's complicated." Lionel stared down at the pure material potential sitting in the man's hands. "I'll take your vest and your hat too," said the man. "Please." The man took off his coat and put on Lionel's orange vest. He put on Lionel's hat and pulled it low, covering his eyes. As he walked, he passed the frame, diligently sweeping the connecting antechamber, and paused to point back toward the metal-strewn hallway he'd just come from. "You missed the spot," he said. The frame stared at him and then at the hallway. It marched towards its new objective, and the man continued his walk. So just a little summary before I continue reading. The Drifter met this old man who was sweeping up petals from Crimson Days, and he's like, "Let me take care of this for you." So he gives the man some glimmer, takes his vest, his clothes, his hat for a disguise, and now he's going to listen to a top secret meeting. Warlock Anor Mahal brushed past a maintenance worker in an orange vest, emptying a trash can in a large plastic bag. The door to the consensus closed heavily behind her. The Vanguard and representatives from various city factions had gathered around a massive table. Cayde's seat was empty. "The Drifter poses no immediate threat to the population," Zavala was saying to the consensus as Anor approached. "Therefore, we motion to grant him a more permanent lease." "My order disagrees," she cut in fiercely. Zavala turned. With a slight incline of his head, he gestured from her to the rest of the group. "This is Warlock Anor, representing the Praxic Order." "I have paperwork to file, so I'll make this short," she said. "If the Vanguard is willing, the Praxic Order would like to excise the Drifter from the city immediately. We'll do it ourselves." Zavala turned to look at her. "The Praxic opinion is noted, but the city welcomes all Guardians. He's no Guardian. The city welcomes all of humanity who are willing to stand in defense of the city. Commander, with due respect, you asked the Order to have a voice in this discussion." She looked Zavala in the eye and swept her gaze around the table to address Consensus and Ikora. "The Praxic Order has existed since the founding of the city to keep artifacts of the darkness out of Guardian hands. In our opinion, the Drifter represents as great of a threat to our people as Gaul or the Taken King." "Go on, girl," Executor Hideo said, steepling his fingers. "She is no girl," Ikora hissed. Anor ignored them both, continuing. The Drifter has convinced the Guardian population to use the Taken as a weapon to murder Guardians. There have been no final deaths, said Zavala. That we know of, Anur replied. You're allowing that man to normalize interaction with the Taken. Ikora and Zavala shared a look. The past few months, the Praxic Order has seen a historic number of Guardians go rogue. Rogue? What is rogue? Arak Jalal said. Everyone is rogue now. It's fashionable to be a rogue. You'll see it in my report, Anur replied. Some have adopted the name Dredgen. You want my professional opinion? Ideas are powerful things, and the Drifter has too many. Board that travesty he calls his ship and throw him out of an airlock before the city sees another dark age. The Vanguard and Consensus looked at her in silence. I have paperwork to file, she said again, turning around. You know where my office is. As she left, she seen that the same maintenance worker had fallen asleep in the entranceway, hat over his eyes, leaning against a trash can. She narrowed her eyes. So that was the first narrative preview, and of course links to that can be found down below. But here, if you are a little confused, the Drifter basically disguised himself to get up close to this meeting where they're talking about getting rid of him and that he's making Guardians go rogue and becoming sort of corrupted with this darkness. The next narrative preview is very mysterious and kind of weird as the Drifter follows this Anur character back to the lab where she's studying the death of Cayde 6. This time he chooses a little bit of a different disguise. Here's what it says. Dawdling outside the entrance to a Gensum lab, the man tucked a green coin into a pocket of his newly acquired duster and then checked to make sure his obsidian mine was sealed shut. He fiddled with the clasps of his helmet as a technician carrying a clipboard hurried up to the door. She stepped inside and he followed on her heels. The doors almost caught him as they slid shut and the tech noticed, turning around to take stock of him. How you livin', the man said in a deep modulated voice as he shouldered past her. Creep, the tech mothered and she walked the other way. The man stopped to check a listing of room schedules on a monitor at the front desk, then continued down the hall into the darkness of Lab 3. Inside, the Praxic Warlock Anur stood under a constellation of holographic projections anchored in the air around her. She saw the man out of the corner of her eye and nodded her head slightly. Warlock, the man said in greeting. Warlock, she returned, dragging a looping feed from a far corner into focus in front of her. I won't be long. Take your time, he said, leaning up against the far wall. I've always wanted to see a Praxic at work. I assure you it's glamorous, she replied, throwing up her arms wide and unfolding the feed into a three-dimensional space. The lab flashed with light and became the shattered, burning husk of the prison of elders. The man turned to his left and saw a familiar, weathered face staring up at the 8 barons of the tangled shore. Cayde 6 stumbled forward and raised a hand. Hey, help me out there, little buddy. His ghost then appeared in a blazing burst of light. Freeze playback, Anur said. Time stopped. Confirm what I'm seeing. The tower's central processing unit spoke with an automated voice. Ghost Sundance, audio-visual feed third-person perspective, date of recording is roughly 6 months prior. Scan the feed for soft light interposition. None found. This ghost feed is direct from the subject's databanks and has not been tampered with. Resume playback, Anur said. The high-pitched whine of the rifleman's weapon was the last sound of the feed. It was the last thing Cayde's ghost had ever heard. The bullets shattered the holographic world around Anur and the man, and Lab 3 reappeared in its place. Anur swept her coat back and clasped her armored hands behind her. Why did the feed end? Subject Sundance suffered unrecoverable system failure and ceased recording. Scorn guns can't kill a ghost, the man said, taking a step from the wall and uncrossing his arms. Anur ignored him. Cause of death? She continued. Sundance appears to be the victim of a single catastrophic wound from a Devourer Bullet, modified to fire from a Scorn launcher, projectile classified as ontological. Define Devourer Bullet. Payload matches the ballistics of a weapon of sorrow or a comparable hive implement. What do you think, Warlock? Anur asked the man without turning around. Didn't the Mindbender build himself an ascendant throne? Yes. Crafting bullets sounds easy if you can manage that. Sword logic doesn't work that way. The throne came after, Anur replied. It was built on Cayde 6's death. I didn't catch your name. Finch, said the man. Finch, Anur echoed dryly. He gestured at the holographic displays. What's all this for? The various HUDs and data streams reflected off Anur's polished black helmet. I'm investigating the possible involvement of the hero of war in the death of Cayde 6. Finch chuckled. Won't they hang you for that? Ainur looked at the ground. You'd be surprised what the city will let a light bearer get away with. I hear that. So, is this big hero actually the villain? You can read the report once the Vanguard publishes it. Finch nodded. Fair enough. He turned to leave, then stopped himself. And what actually happens if the saint turns out to be a sinner? Ainur still hadn't turned around. The Praxic Order doesn't hesitate, doesn't stop. If we can prove you've done demonstrable harm to humanity or the city, doesn't matter how far or how fast you can run, we'll catch you and you'll face Praxic Fire. You're a scary sister. She turned to look at him. You have no idea. Flinch coughed and headed for the door. Behind him, Ainur called out, "Didn't you need lab time?" "Just remembered I'm busy," he replied over his shoulder and disappeared. The doors then closed and Ainur stood in the half-darkness, a sea of data screams reflecting off her helmet. "Restart the feed," she said. So Guardians, if you're still with me to this point, that lore is pretty awesome, and it kind of reminds me of the whole Hunt the Truth situation with Halo 5. Of course, that campaign could have turned out way better, but it's the same type of thing. They're hunting down Master Chief, trying to figure out where he is, and this is the same thing with Egypter. They're investigating him, trying to figure out his involvement with these rogue Guardians, and also our possible involvement with Cayde 6's death. So let's summarize this real quick. First, Egypter disguised himself in the maintenance man's gear and listens to the consensus meeting or is outside of it. Here we learn that the Praxic Order wants Egypter out because Gambit is dangerous and the Guardians are going rogue. He is essentially weaponizing the Taken. After the meeting is done, Ainur leaves. She sees the Drifter disguised there sitting on the bench, and she goes to some of the labs to investigate. From here, the Drifter follows her once more and disguises himself as a Warlock wearing an obsidian mind helmet and a voice modulator. Now when he enters the room, he sees Ainur is looking at a projection of Cayde 6's death, or in particular the scene where his ghost gets destroyed by the rifleman.
You help me out here, little buddy.
Now the automated voice of the tower describes sort of what's going on here. That the rifleman's bullet is a Devourer Bullet, which comes from weapons of sorrow or a hive implement, but more likely a weapon of sorrow, as we see this stuff with Thorn. They also say it wasn't possible for the Barons to acquire this because the Mindbender didn't have a throne world at this point, so someone gave the rifleman this bullet. Now we know this is super weird because weapons of sorrow are guardian weapons corrupted by the hive, or in this case it seems like a bullet. So someone gave them this bullet, and it wouldn't really make sense for it to be Aldrin, so who could it be? To find it randomly seems like a little bit of a stretch and weird to me, so I don't think Bungie would just throw that in there. So the big thing to note here is that the Praxic Order is studying the Drifter and his corruption with the darkness, and also the Guardian's possible involvement with Cayde 6's death and how those Barons got that bullet. So from that point, the Drifter leaves the room and she continues to analyze the projection. So it would seem here that the Order is trying to uncover the Drifter and his plans, and given that she is investigating the Guardian's involvement and we've been working alongside the Drifter as well, she essentially is trying to prove that we did something wrong. So now of course I made this video and then Bungie decided to release another lore entry today. So I'm not going to read this whole thing because at this point this video is very long, but basically Ikora enters the lab after all of this and talks to Ainur about this situation. It says, Ikora Ray stepped into Lab 3, followed by Ophiuchus. If that idiot thinks we don't recognize him, it would be easy to empty a shotgun in his back and wait for his ghost to show up, Ainur interrupted. It must be close by. She stared hard at an image of Cayde's final moments. Ikora then explains how the Guardian, or us, are the best Guardian she knows. All we've done up to this point is help the city, everything we've fought for has been for the light, and so on. We've done nothing wrong with Cayde's death. Ikora is then like, okay, what evidence do you have? And she says Sundance was murdered by the Barons of the Tangled Shore. They pooled all their resources together to craft a single thorn-like bullet. Had they missed, the last few months would have played out very differently. The Hunters might still have their vanguard. So she explains the Barons gathered everything they could to craft that single bullet, but how realistic is that? Ainur herself has no more evidence than we do, so at this point she's speculating as well. How did these Barons manage to gather all this scrap together and somehow make a bullet compared to the weapons of sorrow? Ikora then tells her to stay away from the Drifter, and then the lore card there ends. So a little bit of closure, but it still brings up more questions than answers, in my opinion. Now, I'm sure we'll get more lore on this tomorrow and throughout the release of this season, but let's dive super deep and put on those tinfoil hats. It's time for some crazy speculation.
Don't do that.
Now, of course, not saying any of this is true, but myself and my friends really enjoyed discussing these theories and wanted to share some of them with you. So I'm sure other Guardians have brought up these theories as well, but the people that brought it to my attention were my friends Spiridified or Ben and Armad12, who is Ryan. Let's jump right into it. Now, Anor thinks this could be our own Guardians doing, but as we can see from the card, the Drifter acts very suspicious. He asks, so is the hero actually the villain? She then says, wait for the Vanguard's report on it, blah blah blah, and then here the Drifter, who has named himself Finch, begins to turn and leave. Before he does, he turns back and he's like, wait, what happens if this saint is actually the sinner and the hero is actually the villain here? Anor basically says if the Praxic Order has evidence that the Guardian did do this, they would destroy them on sight. Drifter then turns, she's like, wait, I thought you wanted this lab for some lab time. And he's like, nah, I'm good, just remembered I'm busy, and then he steps out of the room. So with this, the Drifter wants to know what would happen to this person that committed this crime. Once he gets a little creeped out, he suddenly decides to leave as if he was somehow in the wrong or knew someone that was. So moving forward, those are the two sort of topics we're going to revolve around. One, the Drifter did this, or two, he knows someone that gave them that Devourer Bullet. Now let's start with the Drifter. Why would the Drifter be qualified to have been this sort of weapons dealer with the Barons? How could he give them the bullet? Well, first, we know his backstory with the Shadows of Yore and him possibly being a Dredgen or part of the Shadows. If he was like described by the Emissary of the Nine, he would have access to these sorrow or weapon tech, and at this point I think he's one of the most qualified people we know to be in that position. Second, he helped kill Callum's soul. Throughout certain quests like The Last Word, the Drifter tells us that that man with the golden gun smeared his friend's ashes on a rock, but when behind the scenes, he actually contacted Shin and told him where Callum was in the first place. And lastly, we have the Last Word quest, where the Drifter becomes more interested in the weapons of sorrow and these Hive rituals. The Hive are trying to make those weapons, and it seems like the Drifter wants a little bit of a piece of it, although he's acting very cautiously. We even see at the end there, once we turn up with the Last Word, he's very frustrated. He's like, wait, why do you have that thing? It should be something completely different.
What the hell are you doing with that gun? That's the last word. You know you can trust me, but the man who gave you that? He's the one who walked into hell and spread my friend's ashes on the side of a rock. Oh, you are such a punk.
So if this is true and the Drifter did plant this bullet, why would he want Cayde 6 dead? In the Ace of Spades quest, we learn that Cayde knew the Drifter long ago. He says this.
This one's for the fellow who calls himself the Drifter. You did warn me running with you would put a target on my back. Guess I'm in good company though, huh? After all, never had any fun without a little risk. That's the whole idea with the operation you're putting together, ain't it? My idea, by the way, had it like a million years ago, back when you were still handsome. So, you're welcome. You know, getting that up and running means coming out of hiding. Giving you-know-who another shot at you. Hope I was around to see that showdown. Personally, my money was on the guy with the golden gun. But hey, what do I know? I'm dead.
So Cayde knew what the Drifter was up to. It was no surprise to him that he was possibly running with the Shadows or was a part of them. Cayde knew about the Drifter's past and also his situation with Shin Malphur as well. Now when you think about it, Cayde was really the only person who knew the Drifter and his past before Forsaken, before he arrived at the tower. If someone did have a problem or could expose him with the Shadows of Your corruption like the Praxic Order, Cayde 6 would be that evidence. Cayde would be like, oh yeah, I knew that he was running with the Shadows all that time ago, but Cayde 6 is dead, his seat is empty at this meeting, and the Drifter is safe for now. So the Drifter shows up around Forsaken near Cayde 6's death and begins his game of Gambit. With Cayde gone, things would seem alright to proceed as not many people here, if any, knew who the Drifter was. Of course besides Shin, but he's not really at the tower. So it would seem like the Drifter's running his game. He thinks he's getting away with some of this, corrupted stuff and the game of Gambit. But this all changes when he realizes the Praxic Order is here and they're having a meeting. So he stalks Anor, goes behind the scenes to figure out what she knows, and it's kind of odd, right? Of course, he could just be eavesdropping to protect Gambit and his future plans, but could it be really something more like his involvement with the death of Cayde 6?
He didn't feel a thing.
Now next we wanted to throw this out there as well, but it was kind of like, I don't know if that would work, but I might as well just put it in here anyway. So in the Warden of Nothing strike, the goal was to clean out the prison of elders of any stragglers, but the Drifter told us that we needed to kill the Varric servitor, as the thing's been rampant since he left and is kind of going a little bit crazy. So some of the things I find kind of weird is, one, why did the Drifter run this strike? It could have just been Bungie's writing purposes, like, hey, we'll throw the Drifter here, give him something else to do besides Gambit, and yeah. It could have easily been someone like Zavala to send us in. He's the leader of the Vanguard in the city, he would tell us what to do, right? Why is it the Drifter? And two, he might have had us take out the servitor to cover up its past memories. If the Drifter was somehow connected to Cayde 6's death and was involved in this prison break to some extent, he may have wanted this thing destroyed to hide any possible evidence spilling out in the future.
What's your scam here, Drifter? You always have one.
No scam.
My Guardian just annihilated a small army to kill one servitor. You have an army?
Careful who you threaten. I just wanted to help one of my favorite Guardians out. Guy can't do that? I thought this was a new golden age. Be kind to each other. Am I right?
I'm sorry.
You're the sorriest thing I ever saw.
The other big question is the Devourer Bullet. This is the very bullet that shares the same name of other Sorrow machines like the Thorn. If it wasn't Aldrin who gave them this bullet in the first place, how did they get it? Now they mentioned it couldn't have come from the Mindbender because they didn't have a throne world at this point, so was it some other high relation? Was it the Shadow, this new character right here? Now for those of you that don't know, the latest press release shows the NPCs. You have the Drifter, the Emissary of the Nine, and then this character labeled as the Shadow. Now this was in the NPC folder, so it could be a new NPC, or it just could be our own Guardian labeled as the Shadow now if we are merging and becoming a part of his crew. Anyway Guardians, that's all I got for today's video. I know it was a long one, but let me know your thoughts down below. Is the Drifter a little hesitant because he knows the Praxic Order is onto him? Or will this just add more fuel to the fire down the path of the shadows? Once again, thanks to Ryan and Ben for helping me out with this script, and I thank you all very much for watching. My name's Evade, and I'll catch you Guardians in the next one.